President Biden is set to address the nation in about an hour after convening a call with Canadian and European leaders, as well as EU and NATO representatives. There are also reports of intense shelling, mass evacuations, and explosions in the Russian-controlled separatist areas of Ukraine. The U.S. State Department is calling it a false flag operation, a possible pretext for a Russian invasion. Terry Moran is in Ukraine, and he joins me live now with the very latest. Terry, the accelerated shelling and the bombing that we're hearing about, how unusual is this in that region?
Well, Diane, it is an ominous level of it. This has been a frozen conflict now for almost 8 years. This separatist region is not so much a separatist region, really, as Russian proxies have seized territory of Russian-speaking Ukrainians out there. This long simmering conflict, has been pocked with shelling and firing across that front line there. When we were at the Ministry of Defense, we did see a map that you could go day by day, hour by hour, that lit up shells that were landing in Ukraine, and there's some every day. But what we have seen today is a dramatic escalation, Diane, right down that entire front line. Several hundred miles. There has been shelling and firing with artillery, tanks, mortars, other things across the front line into Ukraine. And that is alarming because, for a long time, the United States has been concerned that an escalation in the fighting there could be a pretext, could be used as justification for Vladimir Putin to say the citizens of that part of Ukraine, that breakaway part of Ukraine, are Russian-speaking, and we must defend them. We must come to their rescue and use it as a pretext for an invasion. The Ukrainian Ministry of Defense says, yes, these are much more intense levels of shelling. We haven't seen that in months. We are not initiating it. We don't want to kill people on those sides. On the other side, those are Ukrainians over there. They are our brothers and sisters. The National Security Advisor I spoke to here, his mom lived there until very recently. So they don't think of it as the enemy. They think of it as a piece of their country that's been taken away. And they say, we are not starting this, but it is certainly lit up for real.
And what can you tell us about these mass evacuations, Terry?
This is another ominous sign, Diane. The rebel governments, the self-declared republics out there, two areas, separatist areas, essentially run by Russia, backed by Russia, armed by Russia, have declared a mass evacuation, up to 700,000 people. And they have put pictures on social media. Can't quite tell where they're from or whether they represent widespread or whether it's staged, of what they say are the evacuations of innocent civilians because there's about to be a massive invasion, they say, from the Ukrainian side. It's almost like turning what the Ukrainians and the Americans are warning about against them, that jiu-jitsu-like disinformation, that it is the Ukrainians who are massing for a mass slaughter of people in that area. And they've called up those people, every able-bodied man in those areas, to fight, and they've called for this evacuation. It's hard to say how many people are really being evacuated. When you look at the pictures, it said it's voluntary, but it doesn't look very voluntary. They've shown women and children who they're calling orphans. This is all over Russian TV. And this, of course, is also very alarming to the United States because the president and others have been predicting a potential false flag operation for a while, and that finally tonight there was what was described in Russian media as a car bombing in the downtown big city out there of Donetsk. It looked from the Russian media like it was a Jeep that caught on fire. It didn't look like any car bombing I've seen. But once again, these are things that are being done to whip up fear, hysteria, and perhaps a justification for an attack.
And what are Ukrainian leaders saying about these developments, and how are Ukrainians preparing?
Well, the Ukrainian leaders are saying stay calm. As I say, the National Security Advisor spoke and tried to speak directly to the people on the other side of those front lines, saying, we are not your enemy. We are your brothers and sisters. We are all fellow Ukrainians. We are not going to attack you. But they're locked in an information bubble over there, controlled from Moscow. And what they're hearing is a constant drumbeat that the other side is about to invade. And so that is one problem that the Ukrainian officials have. The other is this sense that they don't want a flashpoint to go off. So they aren't looking for anything that could trigger an invasion, and they don't want to get too aggressive in response. They are firing if their positions are fired upon, but they aren't really trying to meet fire with fire over on that side of the country. In general, all of these developments, the U.S. warnings, this escalated shelling, the warnings of false flag, has got more and more people on edge.
And Terry, we heard from Vladimir Putin today. He described it as an escalating situation and outlined his conditions for diplomacy as the military exercises continue. What did you make of his posture today?
You know, what do you make of anything Vladimir Putin says? It seems to, every statement seems to have several trapdoors and a ghost in it, almost. He is saying, on the one hand, of course, we want to work with our colleagues and partners, which is the way he describes people we really consider as enemies or adversaries, it seems, in order to look for a diplomatic way out. But we must, he says, take action. Military technical measures is what he calls the 150,000 plus forces massed on Ukraine's borders, poised for an attack if he gives the word. And so it is hard to read anything he's saying, and that's the way he likes it. He likes to keep his options open, but he has clearly planned for something big, and it will be difficult, it seems, as the President of the United States has acknowledged, to back him down. President Biden saying yesterday he believes an invasion here is likely in the next several days. And to talk about that and about the situation here, let's bring in our colleague, ABC News security analyst and former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense, Mick Mulroy. Mick, let me ask you first just about this situation. You have significantly escalated firing across the line of contact, as they call it, the front line out in eastern Ukraine, and now these mass evacuations, all accompanied by an information campaign on Russian and local eastern Ukrainian media. It feels pretty ominous.
Yes, Terry, it does. It looks like we're in the final preparation for a Russian all-out invasion, and quite frankly, it's played out almost precisely as our intelligence services had predicted, to include these cyber attacks, these electronic warfare, and now this false flag operation that appears to be playing out real time. The evacuations, as you mentioned, might just be to get civilians out of the way so that they can launch that part of the invasion from the east. I do think in the coming days we'll start seeing pretty substantial air campaign to prepare the battlefield, and then potentially a special operation effort to decapitate and go after Ukrainian leadership and command and control. And then, if the President Putin elects, it would be a full-out invasion coming from both the north, the east, and an amphibious assault in the south.
You know, it's hard for me to imagine, Mick, that why anyone would think that a bombing in Russian-controlled Ukraine at this particular moment would be the work of Ukrainians. I mean, it almost seems like Putin doesn't even care anymore if the world believes that this is an attack by the other side, which would justify his moves. It's a strange brew of disinformation and hysteria that is being developed over there. But I want to ask you about how President Biden deals with this. So he's on the phone today with the leaders of closest allies, UK, France, Germany, Poland, others. What can he do at this point? He's out and talked a lot to the country and to the world about this. Is there anything he can do now to dissuade Vladimir Putin, do you think?
So, Terry, to your first question, I would say you're right. It's nonsensical to think that essentially you have a David and Goliath type situation and that David's going to start the fight. It's just not logical to the rest of the world. Perhaps Putin only cares about what the Russians believe, and that's why he's using these provocations to do that. As far as President Biden and the United States and NATO, I think it's fair to say we've done everything we can when it comes to the diplomatic effort. It was now clear that Putin was using that simply to make time for him to build up his forces on the border. Now we have to, NATO and the United States has to turn to our playbook. If an invasion occurs, how are we going to react? The sanctions that were just talked about at the press conference, all the other tools we have, and then, of course, to protect ourselves in a possible, if not likely, counterattack by the Russians to these sanctions going after our businesses, our infrastructure with cyber attacks. So we have to be prepared both to go on the offensive, at least economically, not militarily, and also to defend ourselves, because it's likely that part of the Russian plan is to cause pain to the West once they see these severe sanctions imposed.
Let me ask you about that. If, in fact, as it increasingly feels and looks likely, Russia attacks, what does the day after look like? Obviously awful for Ukraine, but I want to ask about the stable world, more or less, that we've known in Europe for many, many years since the fall of the Soviet Union. What does it look like next for Russia, for our allies, and for the United States' role over here?
So this is where things can become really complicated and have the potential to turn into a war between superpowers. Ukraine is obviously going to take the brunt of the invasion. I do believe they're going to fight ferociously, and it's going to cause quite a bit of casualties on both sides. But after that initial push in and the occupation of terrain, there will be an insurgency, and that insurgency will likely be based in countries outside of Ukraine. So it could be in Poland, a NATO country, right where U.S. forces are. And we're likely to support that insurgency. And if an insurgency has a safe haven, they tend to be pretty effective, especially if they're supported by the United States and NATO. So this has a chance and likely will spread outside of the Ukraine territory, and it will likely last for many, many years. But it does create a potential for a conflict to happen between NATO and Russian forces. And that could escalate quickly and, quite frankly, get out of control.
That is truly scary, Mick, and it is hard to see what Russia or anyone gets out of these scenarios. Mick Mulroy, thanks very much, as always, for that.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.